Hey everyone, in this video I just want to quickly go through a couple of Houston features just as a bit of an overview of how to use it since the functionality changes pretty quickly and we don't always have like a user guide up to date. So anyway, I've got my OBC connected here, and I think the first thing that's worth talking about is how to connect a new board. Let's say you got a new launchpad or you changed hardware with someone. You might not have this set up. So to do that, head over to settings, and then either on the OBC or the HTTP, you can click here and it'll list the serial ports for you. Then you can just click whichever one it is, hit close, and I have one connected right now, so there's nothing really I can do about this. But you're going to want to click the actual serial port text here, and that'll tell it to try to reconnect to the board. And hopefully after a second or two, it should turn green. The other thing you can do is, let's say you've got an HTTP and then you're not using it, or you change it to a launchpad or something. You can always go into settings and change the board to none, and then it'll stop being used. The screen we're on right now, we call the monitor tab, but has just kind of quick commands and things like that. So we have buttons for various, like, pretty frequently used OBC commands, but we also have a text input box here. This is useful if you want to do something like sending a command that's scheduled. So let's do ACK 20:01:01:0. Actually, I should get the time. So 3:43. So if I make that 50, and then every 5 seconds, now it's hit that scheduled time because it was only a second or two after I actually sent the command, and now we're running that ACK command every 5 seconds, which is what I told it to do. So the command entry here can definitely be useful if you want to do something like run or test a scheduled command. The other thing you can do is downlink files. Let me actually just issue a couple of bad commands so that there's something in my error log. And let's maybe just check that I actually have an error log. So let's do ls 1 Jan 2020. So I've got some telemetry files, and I've got my error log as well. Okay, cool. So that means these files exist on the OBC, which is great. Let's say I actually want to downlink one. The command for that is put request. And I believe the arguments are just the file path. So 01 Jan 2020 slash error log. Run that, and it downlinked. So it may not be obvious where that actually went, but if you... I'll just open it off screen here. In the Houston repo, you've got this OBC files directory, and then in there, it keeps whatever you've downlinked. So I've downlinked stuff before, but this is the new error log, and you can see it's got the invalid command messages that I created. So that's how to do, I guess, both downlink files and send scheduled commands. The other tab that's super useful is the testing tab. So typically you'll probably just want to run all the tests. So for that, you can just hit the run test button. But it can also be useful to just run a single test or all the tests in a file or something like that. And that's what this text entry box is for. So what I can do here, I've got a lot of options that are provided by their kind of listed in that helper text there. But I can do things like test command, that's the name, I believe, of a file with a couple of test functions in it. So I hit run and we'll see what it gives. Okay, looks like it's just got one test, and that failed, which is interesting. That shouldn't really fail. But that kind of brings up how to look at failures, which is good. So you can click on the name of a test that failed, and it'll show you where in the test we actually had an assertion failure. But that may not always be enough information to actually help you figure out what's going on. If you're trying to debug a failure, I typically hit the verbose checkbox here, and we'll just run the test again. And okay, great. Now it actually passed. That's interesting. So got a little reliability issue, it seems like. But the verbose output is actually in the terminal of just kind of wherever you launched Houston from. So for me, that's within VS Code. And so it's broken into a couple of sections here. So number one, it's telling me which test function it's actually running. So that's useful. The setup is all of the kind of behind the scenes stuff that's happening before we actually enter this test function. So it's all the stuff that the fixtures are doing. The live log call is everything during the actual test itself. So it's sending a command, it's getting an expected response, it's getting another expected response, and so on. And if we had a failure, we might see, or we definitely would see error messages and things like that in this output, and that can really be useful to figure out what was going on. I guess the other thing I'll note about testing is, unfortunately, right now, if you're writing a test and you change the test itself, let me kind of deliberately mess this test up. ID, like, I don't know, just any other thing that is not correct. So I'll mess this test up, and then I'll run it again, and chances are it'll still pass, even though I introduced an error into the test itself. Yeah. This is because when you edit a test, you actually have to quit Houston and start it back up again for the changes to your test to actually be registered. That's definitely kind of a drag. It certainly slows you down, but it's a known issue right now, and it's proven a bit difficult to fix. So it's an existing bug. One final thing about testing is the different kind of results you can have. So of course, failed means the test failed. As I mentioned before, you can get the output. Running usually means that the test is actually in the process of running, although in this case here, I'm on some weird firmware branch with a lot of problems. It's possible to have failed and running and failed and running like this. These actually did all fail. Running is is really only valid if it's the only time you see running. And skipped tests are skipped. This is an intentional thing. They're skipped either if they require an HTTP, but you don't have one plugged in, which is the case I have here right now. They can also be skipped if we expect the test to fail, and we can tell PyTest to actually skip that test, so that we don't get all kinds of failures. We only get unexpected failures, like I have right now. So anyway, that's just a kind of a quick overview of some things you can do in Houston right now. Thanks for watching.